The air was thick with the stench of sweat, smoke, and fear. In the dim light of the underground bunker, metal cages lined both sides of a concrete corridor. Inside them, women sat in silence, eyes hollow, bodies bruised. Each cage was marked not with a name, but with a number stenciled in black paint: 32, 41, 47, 50. Their identities had been erased long ago. At the far end of the corridor, a group of men gathered around a metal table under a single flickering bulb. They laughed, drank, and exchanged money. Stacks of cash and poker chips gleamed in the yellow light. The sound of dice rolling, the click of cigarette lighters, and the low hum of cruel amusement filled the space. Tonight, there was a special event. Number 47 was in labor. She was young, no older than 20, but her eyes were ancient with exhaustion. Her hair clung to her face, slick with sweat. She knelt on a stained mattress inside her cage, clutching her swollen belly. Every contraction came like a wave of fire. She bit her lip to keep from screaming, afraid that the sound would earn her a strike from the guards' batons. But she couldn't help it. The pain was too much. Her cry broke through the air, raw and human. The men turned toward her cage. One of them, tall, heavy, wearing a gold watch, grinned and said, "She's starting. 10 minutes, maybe less. Who's betting she doesn't make it?" Laughter erupted. Money changed hands. Someone wrote figures on a clipboard. Another man shouted, "200 says the kid's stillborn." The others howled, clinking their glasses. To them, it wasn't a birth. It was a game. In the shadows near the back wall, one man didn't laugh. Elias Ward leaned against a pillar, pretending to sip from a flask. His jaw was clenched tight enough to ache. To the others, he was just another guard, a quiet one who followed orders. But behind his eyes burned something dangerous. He had been undercover for weeks now, documenting every face, every voice, every scream in this place. He had seen things that would haunt him forever, but tonight, this and was something different. He couldn't look away from 47. She wasn't like the others. There was a defiance in her even as she bled and shook. She gritted her teeth, pressing her forehead against the cold metal bars, whispering to herself in a language Elias didn't understand. Her hands trembled as she tore a strip from her thin blanket, preparing for what she knew was coming. Alone. Trapped. When her scream tore through the air again, Elias flinched. He saw one of the guards approach the cage, baton raised. "Quiet down, you animal," the man barked. Elias's hand drifted toward the gun at his hip. Instinct, but he stopped himself. One wrong move and his cover would be blown, so he watched. Powerless. The room grew louder, the men shouting, the bets rising, the mockery sharper. The bulb above flickered as 47 gave one last cry, her body racked with pain. Then a silence, a small frail sound followed. A baby's first cry. It was the only pure thing in that room. The laughter stopped for a moment. Even the cruelest men fell quiet. Then someone spat on the floor and muttered, "A girl. Useless." The others laughed again, louder than before. Elias looked at the newborn, red, trembling, alive, and then at her mother. 47 held the baby close, tears mixing with sweat, whispering something tender that only she and the child could understand. In that instant, Elias made a silent promise. Not yet, he told himself. But soon, because that baby deserved more than this cage, and the woman holding her. She deserved a name. The crowd dispersed slowly, their laughter still echoing against the concrete walls. The metallic rattle of the cage doors and the scrape of boots faded down the corridor, leaving only the steady hum of a generator and the faint, rhythmic cry of the newborn. Elias Ward stood motionless, his shadow long under the weak light. His role here was clear: blend in, observe, gather evidence. Don't interfere. That's what his handler kept reminding him. But the line between observation and complicity had never felt so thin. He took a slow breath and scanned the room again. Hidden cameras were planted behind the air vents, disguised as sensors. A miniature transmitter blinked once on his belt, sending silent footage to a receiver somewhere miles away. He'd built this operation carefully. 6 months of work, 5 false identities, 3 dead ends. And yet all of it suddenly felt meaningless against the sight of that woman holding her newborn in a cage. He moved closer, careful not to draw attention. The number burned into a metal tag fastened around her wrist, sat hunched over, her body trembling. The baby lay against her chest, barely wrapped in a piece of torn blanket. The tiny creature made soft, searching sounds, unaware of the world she'd entered, a world that turned women into wagers and infants into property. Elias crouched down near the bars, pretending to check the lock. "You need water?" he asked quietly. The woman lifted her head, startled. Her eyes were wild, sharp with suspicion, but beneath the fear was something that looked almost like defiance. She hesitated, then nodded once. He slid a tin cup through the bars. Her hands shook as she took it. "Drink slow," he said. "You're safe for now." She didn't understand all the words, but she caught the tone. Her lips moved. "Safe?" Like she was testing the sound. Elias nodded once. "I'll make sure you are." She looked at him for a long moment, then down at her baby. "No safe," she whispered finally, her accent thick. "No name. No safe." The simplicity of it cut through him more sharply than any gunshot could. He wanted to tell her that he'd get her out, that this nightmare was almost over, but he couldn't make promises yet. Not here. Not when every word might be overheard. Behind him, the door creaked open. One of the guards stepped in. Riker, a brute of a man with greasy hair and a laugh like gravel. "You getting sentimental, Ward?" He sneered, seeing Elias near the cage. "She's just breeding stock." "Don't waste your sympathy." Elias straightened. "Just checking the lock," he said evenly. "Boss doesn't like it when merchandise gets loose." Riker grunted approval. "Yeah, well, she won't be around long. They'll take the kid tomorrow. Mom'll get recycled." "Recycled?" Elias repeated, his voice calm, but inside the word detonated like a mine. Riker smirked. "You know, sold off, repurposed, whatever they do. Doesn't matter. Nobody keeps track of numbers." He turned and left, whistling as he went. The sound of his footsteps faded, leaving the room silent again. Elias stared at 47 through the bars. Her gaze met his, and for the first time he saw more than fear. He saw understanding. She knew. She'd heard. And so, without words, a silent agreement formed between them. He was done watching. That night, Elias sat in the corner of his quarters, the flicker of the monitor lighting his face. He replayed the footage and the cage, the bets, the baby's cry. His handler's voice buzzed in his earpiece. "Good work, Ward. We'll have enough evidence in another week. Stay put until extraction." Elias looked at the monitor one last time, at 47 rocking her child. "A week," he muttered. "They don't have a week." He turned off the camera feed and picked up his gun. Tomorrow, he decided, was the day everything changed. He next morning came without sunlight. The bunker had no windows. Only the harsh glare of fluorescent bulbs that hummed like angry insects. The air was colder than usual, the kind of cold that made metal sting to the touch and breath hang white in the air. Number 47 sat curled in her cage, her baby pressed to her chest. The infant had stopped crying hours ago, too weak to protest the hunger gnawing at her tiny stomach. 47 rocked gently, whispering lullabies from a language no one there understood. Each word was a prayer. Across the corridor, Elias Ward watched through a narrow slit in the control room door. His eyes were bloodshot from a night without sleep. The plan was falling apart. He'd intercepted a coded transmission from Riker that morning. "The buyers are coming tonight." They were coming for the baby. His stomach turned. He'd seen a lot in his years. War, loss, betrayal. But this was something darker. Something that ate away at the part of a man that believed in redemption. He grabbed his radio. "Pace, this is Ward," he said in a low voice. "Change of schedule. They're moving the infant shipment early. We need backup now." Static crackled, then a calm voice replied. "Negative, Ward. You blow your cover now, we lose the entire operation. Stay put." He slammed the radio down, breathing hard. "Stay put." He'd heard that phrase before, and when his sister was taken. When the system failed. When justice came too late. He wasn't staying put this time. He stepped into the corridor, keeping his expression blank as two guards passed him. The taller one carried a clipboard. The other pushed a small metal cart lined with blankets and tags, one for each infant. Numbers, not names. 47's baby was one of them. When they reached her cage, she clutched her child tighter, shaking her head, whispering, "No, no, no, no." The guards ignored her. The tall one unlocked the door, the hinges shrieking. "Orders are orders," he muttered. She screamed, not in pain this time, but pure, primal terror. Her body lunged forward, desperate to protect the only thing that belonged to her. The guard struck her with his baton and she fell hard, her arms still wrapped around the baby. "Let go," he shouted. That was when Elias moved. He was across the room before he knew it, his hand grabbing the guard's wrist mid-swing. The man turned, startled, and Elias's punch landed like thunder. The second guard reached for his gun, but Elias drew first. 2 shots, fast, controlled. The man dropped before his weapon even cleared the holster, stared, frozen in disbelief. Blood splattered across the concrete. The gunfire echoed down the hall. Alarms started wailing. Elias knelt beside her, his chest heaving. "We have to go," he said, fumbling for the keys. "Now." She hesitated, clutching the baby tighter. "Why?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Because you're not a number," he said, unlocking the cage. "You're a person. You have a name, even if you don't know it yet." Her eyes widened at his words, tears spilling over. She didn't fully understand the language, but she understood meaning. She nodded weakly, clutching the child as Elias helped her to her feet. The sirens blared louder now. Red warning lights flashed through the bunker. Elias grabbed a weapon from one of the fallen guards and handed her a blanket. "Stay behind me," he ordered. As they ran down the corridor, the other women began to stir. Wide-eyed, hopeful, frightened. The sound of freedom, chaos, alarm, defiance rippled through the cages like electricity. For the first time, something alive moved in that place. A spark that no amount of cruelty could ever extinguish. And it had started with a mother's scream and a soldier's decision to finally stop watching. The alarm screamed through the underground halls like a wounded beast. Red lights strobed against the walls, painting everything in pulses of blood. Metal doors slammed shut in sequence, locking sections of the compound. Chaos spread fast. Guards shouting, radios crackling, boots pounding concrete. Elias Ward pushed forward, his arm around 47 to steady her. The baby's soft cries were muffled beneath the blanket pressed against her mother's chest. They ran through the corridor, past cages full of terrified women. Some reached through the bars, grabbing Elias's sleeve, whispering, "Help us." He looked into their faces, hollow eyes, trembling lips, and knew he couldn't leave them behind. He fired at the locks, one after another. "Run!" he shouted. "Run if you want to live." The women hesitated, unsure if this was another cruel trick. Then one of them, a frail woman with a shaved head and shaking hands, stepped out first. When the guards opened fire from the far end of the hall, Elias returned the shots without hesitation. "Go!" he yelled again, his voice fierce, commanding. The women began to move, barefoot and bleeding, scattering into the maze of corridors like ghosts reclaiming their lives. Stumbled beside him, her face pale, every step fueled by sheer will. Elias guided her toward the storage room, his planned exit. Inside was a hatch leading to the old drainage tunnels that fed into the desert. That was their only way out. As they reached the corner, the heavy iron door burst open behind them. Riker stormed in, gun raised, face twisted with rage. "You," he roared. "I knew you were soft." Elias spun, firing once. The shot grazed Riker's shoulder, spinning him sideways. Riker ducked behind a column and laughed, low and cruel. "You think you're some kind of hero? You just doomed them all, Ward. You could have had a cut, but you had to play savior." Elias's jaw clenched. "I'm not here for a cut." "Then what?" Riker barked. "What's she to you? Some broken stray?" Elias didn't answer. The silence was enough. Riker grinned, blood dripping down his arm. "I'll kill her first," he said. "Then I'll take that brat and sell it myself." Elias didn't wait. He charged. The 2 men collided, slamming into the wall with bone-jarring force. The gun skittered across the floor. Riker grabbed a metal pipe, swinging hard. The first hit glanced off Elias's shoulder, but the second cracked against his ribs. Pain exploded through him. He countered with a headbutt, sending Riker reeling. They grappled in the flickering red light, the sounds of chaos echoing all around. Screams, gunfire, the hiss of steam pipes rupturing. Finally, Elias caught Riker's arm, twisted, and drove the man's own knife into his gut. Riker's grin faded into a shocked gasp. "This is for every number you erased," Elias said quietly. Riker fell, his body thudding to the floor. Elias staggered to his feet, blood on his hands, lungs burning. He turned. 47 was still there, clutching her baby tight, eyes wide. She had seen everything. But instead of fear, there was something else in her gaze now. Trust. Come on, he said, voice hoarse. It's over. They reached the storage room. Elias kicked open the hatch, the cold air from the tunnel below rushing up to meet them. One by one, the freed women began to follow. Dozens of them now, barefoot, bruised but alive. Hesitated at the edge, looking back once at the burning corridor. The cages glowed red in the emergency lights like the gates of hell collapsing behind her. Elias extended his hand. It's done, he said. You're free. She took his hand. Together they climbed down into the darkness. Above them, an explosion ripped through the compound. One of the charges Elias had planted days ago as insurance. The entire place shuddered, then began to collapse. The world they escaped from, the one that made monsters of men, was burning. And for the first time, Elias felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The tunnels were narrow, damp, and suffocatingly dark. The only light came from the flickering emergency lamps Elias had rigged earlier, faint orange glows that shimmered off the slick stone walls. The air was thick with dust and the metallic tang of blood and smoke. Every sound echoed, dripping water, shuffling feet, the faint cry of a newborn wrapped in torn fabric. Elias led the way, a pistol in one hand and a small flashlight in the other. Behind him, 47 followed, clutching her baby to her chest. Around them moved the others, a dozen freed women, barefoot and trembling, their fear pressing in like the cold. They were ghosts crawling through the veins of hell. Keep quiet, Elias whispered. These tunnels go under the old waste plant. If we stay low, we'll come out near the canyon. Said nothing, but her eyes stayed fixed on him, cautious, searching as though she still couldn't quite believe this was real. She kept murmuring soft words to her baby, rhythmic and soothing, a mother's song rising against the chaos above. A deafening explosion shook the tunnel. Dust rained from the ceiling and the women screamed. Elias steadied himself against the wall, looking back. The compound was collapsing. The detonators he'd left behind were doing their work. Flames roared somewhere in the distance. Move, he barked. Before it all comes down. They pushed forward faster, feet splashing through shallow water. The tunnel twisted, narrowing until they had to crawl on hands and knees. Elias went first, dragging himself through the dirt, ignoring the pain in his ribs. He turned his head to see 47 struggling to follow, trying to shield the infant with her body. Give her to me, he said. Reaching back, she froze, every muscle tight, her instincts screaming not to let go. I'll help her breathe, he said gently. Just for a minute. Something in his tone broke through her fear. She hesitated, then slowly handed the baby forward. Elias cradled the child close to his chest, pressing his palm to the infant's back to steady her breaths. The tiny body was warm, fragile, alive. He looked back at 47. She's strong, he whispered. Like her mother. They emerged into a wider shaft at last, the end of the tunnel. Ahead, faint moonlight spilled through a broken grate. The cool desert air washed over them like a blessing. Elias climbed up first, kicking aside the old metal bars. One by one, he helped the women through, pulling each of them into the open night. When he finally reached for 47, she came up last, baby pressed close. She blinked in the starlight as if seeing the sky for the first time. For a long moment, no one spoke. The night was vast, endless, a sharp contrast to the cage they'd lived in. The wind swept across the dunes, carrying away the smoke and the scent of fire. Elias turned toward the horizon. There's an old ranger station 5 miles east, he said. We can make it by morning if we stay together. The women nodded weakly, trusting him. They began to move across the sand, their figures pale ghosts against the desert. They lagged behind for a moment. Elias waited, watching her. She looked down at the baby and then up at him. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but all that came out was a single word. Name? Elias blinked, surprised. She touched her chest, then the child's. No number. Name, he understood. He crouched down beside her, his voice soft. You'll have one, he said. Both of you. She smiled faintly, the first true smile he had ever seen from her, and nodded. Behind them, the bunker burned, flames licking the sky like the final breath of something evil dying. Ahead of them lay darkness, uncertainty, but also freedom, and for the first time, she walked not as a number, but as someone who belonged to herself. The first pale light of dawn stretched across the desert, spilling gold over the dunes. The air was still and cold, the silence vast, no alarms, no shouting, no cages. Only the soft crunch of bare feet in the sand as Elias and the women made their slow way toward the old ranger station. By the time they reached it, the sun had risen. The station was nothing more than a crumbling outpost of weathered boards and shattered glass, half buried by drifting sand. But to them it was a palace. Elias pushed open the rusted door. "In here," he said, scanning the horizon before ushering them inside. The room was small, but it offered shelter, a roof, a dusty cot, an old water tank that still dripped life one drop at a time. The women sank to the floor, too weak to speak. A few began to weep softly, the kind of tears that come after the storm, when survival finally feels real. Elias rummaged through the supplies he'd hidden there weeks ago. Medical kits, bottled water, a blanket, some canned food. He poured water into a tin cup and knelt beside 47. "Here," he said. "Drink." She hesitated, and even now instinct made her flinch at a man's hand. But his voice was calm, steady, not a command. She took the cup, her fingers brushing his, and drank greedily. Then she offered it to her baby, dipping her fingers into the water and touching them gently to the infant's lips. Elias smiled faintly. "Smart," he murmured. When the others were settled, he found an old radio transmitter on the shelf. The battery was half dead, but it worked. "This is Ward," he said into the mic. "Operation Iron Veil compromised. Survivors secured at Outpost Echo 7. Need immediate evac." Static filled the air, then a voice crackled through. "Copy that, Ward. Extraction in 12 hours. Sit tight, 12 hours. That might as well have been forever." He turned back to 47. She sat by the window, rocking the baby, staring at the horizon with hollow eyes. The sunlight caught her face, soft features beneath the grime, a quiet strength beneath the exhaustion. He knelt beside her. "You're safe now," he said quietly. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze flickered to the others, then back to him. "Safe," she repeated, as if testing the word's truth. Then, after a pause, she touched her chest lightly. "Name?" Elias blinked. "You want a name?" She nodded. Then, touching the baby, whispered, "Name?" Again. He sat back, the weight of the moment settling between them. These two souls had lived their entire lives as property, reduced to numbers. To give them names, and that meant giving them identity, existence, dignity. He thought for a moment. "Mara," he said softly. "Your name is Mara. It means bitter, but also strong. Stronger than pain." She repeated it, the sound unfamiliar on her tongue. "Mara." Then a small smile broke through, hesitant but real. She pointed to the baby. Elias looked at the tiny face pressed against her chest, fragile, innocent, alive. "And her," he said, voice softening. "She's Hope." Mara exhaled, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Hope," she whispered. "Hope." The word filled the air like a prayer. Elias watched as she held the baby closer, whispering the name over and over, grounding it, claiming it. No longer 47, no longer a number, but Mara. Outside, the desert wind began to rise, carrying with it the faint sound of sirens in the distance. Rescue, or perhaps pursuit. Elias stood checking his weapon. Mara looked up at him. "You stay?" she asked. He nodded. "Until you're safe." She smiled again, tired but real. In that broken ranger station, as dawn turned to day, something sacred took root. The world had taken everything from her, her body, her name, her freedom, but now, in this fragile silence, she was beginning to reclaim it all, and beside her, Elias realized that for the first time in years he wasn't fighting a war. He was protecting something worth living for. The rescue came just after sunset. Helicopter blades cut through the desert air, whipping up waves of sand as the sun dipped behind the dunes. Floodlights swept the ranger station, turning the crumbling outpost into a small island of white light in the growing dark. The freed women shielded their eyes, trembling at the sound, the noise of engines still too close to the machines of their nightmares. Elias stood at the door, rifle ready until a voice called through the loudspeaker. "Ward, this is Captain Harris with Federal Task Force 7. Stand down!" Only then did he lower his weapon. The rescue team moved fast, soldiers and medics swarming the room, wrapping blankets around the survivors, giving water, checking pulses. The once numbered women flinched at first, unaccustomed to gentle hands, but soon the fear began to melt into disbelief. Mara sat quietly in a corner, clutching her baby, watching everything. Elias knelt beside her, speaking softly over the noise. "They're here to help," he said. "You're safe now," she nodded slowly. "You come?" He hesitated. "I will. But I have something I still need to do first." She frowned, sensing something in his voice she didn't like. That quiet distance again. But before she could ask, a medic approached to take her and the baby to the helicopter. Elias touched her shoulder gently. "Go with them, Mara, I'll find you." It wasn't a promise he made lightly. As the helicopters lifted off, Elias stayed behind with Captain Harris, overlooking the smoking horizon where the compound had once stood. "We've got half the ring in custody," Harris said grimly. "But the higher-ups? They'll deny everything. Too many powerful men with too much money at stake." Elias's jaw tightened. "Then we don't give them the chance." He handed over a drive, small, battered, marked with dust and blood. "Every second I recorded down there. The cages, the bets, the men responsible. Uploaded, all of it." Harris hesitated. "You realize this could get you killed, right?" Elias looked at the fire in the distance. "They already killed everything that mattered once. I'm just evening the scales." Within hours, the footage was leaked, and by morning, the world woke to horror. Television screens, phones, and news feeds filled with images that seared themselves into the public conscience. Rusted cages, nameless women, a baby's first cry drowned out by laughter. The footage was brutal, unflinching, proof of a human trafficking ring that stretched from remote deserts to corporate boardrooms and political offices. People wept. Others raged. Streets filled with protests. Governments demanded action. Arrests began within days. Powerful names, once untouchable, dragged into custody under the eyes of the same cameras they had long controlled. Through it all, Elias stayed silent. He refused interviews, refused credit. He watched from the sidelines as the machine of justice finally began to turn. When it was over, or as close to over as it could ever be, he went to the hospital where the survivors were kept. Rows of beds, clean sheets, and soft light. The women who once lived as numbers were now learning to speak again, learning to smile again. He found Mara near the window, dressed in a pale blue gown, sunlight painting her face in gold. Hope lay sleeping in her arms, tiny fingers curled around her mother's necklace, a thin silver chain one of the nurses had given her. Mara looked up and smiled when she saw him. "You come back," she said softly. "I said I would." She nodded, studying his face. "You save us." Elias shook his head. "You saved yourself. I just opened the door." Mara smiled faintly. "Door is enough." He looked at her, this woman who had walked through hell and carried life out of it. And for the first time in a long time, Elias felt something like peace. Outside the hospital window, the desert stretched endlessly, washed clean by morning light. The world had seen its monsters, and though justice could never undo the pain, it had begun to remember the names. Months passed. The desert healed slower than the people who had escaped it. The compound was gone, leveled, sealed, erased from maps, but its ghosts lingered in the wind that rolled over the dunes. Somewhere beyond those silent horizons, new life had begun to take root. Elias Ward parked his truck beside a small cabin on the edge of a wide, open valley. The land stretched for miles. Golden grass, scattered oaks, a creek that caught the sunlight like glass. It was the kind of quiet he had spent his whole life searching for and never believed he'd find. The cabin door opened before he could knock. Mara stood there, barefoot, a soft cotton dress brushing her knees. The lines of fear that once carved her face were gone. Her hair, now free and long, moved gently in the breeze. She smiled when she saw him, a real smile, warm and alive. "Elias," she said, his name careful but sure on her tongue. He nodded, a little awkward, holding out a small box. "Supplies, books, some medicine for the baby." She stepped aside, motioning for him to come in. The cabin smelled faintly of bread and cedar wood. Hope sat on the floor near the window, stacking wooden blocks, her laughter soft and musical. When she saw Elias, her tiny arm shot up. "Up," she giggled. He chuckled, kneeling to scoop her up. "You've grown," he said, and she pressed her small hand against his beard, curious and delighted. Mara watched them, her eyes shining. "She remembers you," she said. "I'd be honored if she did," Elias replied softly. They sat together by the table as the sun began to dip behind the ridge. Mara poured tea, her movements calm and practiced, the gestures of someone who had rebuilt her life piece by piece. "I heard from the others," Elias said after a moment. "Most found homes. Some are testifying, others still trying to find their way." Mara nodded slowly. "Not easy to live again," she said. "But possible." She looked at him, her gaze steady. "You live now?" Elias hesitated. He'd spent years living in shadows, undercover, hidden, lost inside other people's wars. Even after the compound fell, he hadn't known where to go. "Trying," he admitted. "The army took my orders. The world took my silence. I don't know who that leaves me as," Mara smiled softly. "Man who gave name," she said. "That is enough." Her words hit him like a quiet truth, gentle but immovable. He looked at Hope, who had dozed off in her mother's lap, one tiny hand still clinging to Mara's necklace. "She's lucky," he said. Mara shook her head. "No," she whispered. "We lucky." The last light of day filled the cabin, turning everything to gold. For a long moment there was only silence, the kind that didn't need to be broken, the kind that meant peace. Elias rose to leave, but Mara stood too. "You go?" she asked. "Just for now," he said. "There's a town nearby. I can help set things up for you." "Food, papers, a new start." She took a small step forward. "You gave me name," she said, her voice quiet but strong. "Now, maybe you stay. Make new name, too." Elias looked at her. This woman who had been a number, a prisoner, a mother, a survivor, and something in him finally unclenched. The man who once lived only to fight had finally found something to stay for. He nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "Maybe it's time." Outside, the wind stirred the fields, carrying away the last echoes of the past. Inside the little cabin, a woman hummed, a child slept, and a weary man sat down for the first time in years. Not to fight, not to hide, but simply to be. The story of numbers and cages was over. The story of names had just begun.